Hello and welcome to Historical. I am your host, Peter Roberts. At Historical, we think your stories are historical. History is the story of you, and they deserve to be recorded and shared. Historical is the place you come to for advice on how to capture life story, tools to use, and how to complete your project. Listen to experts, memoir writers, and product reviews. Let's inspire you to start. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for episode 14 of Historical. So last week I spoke to Patricia Hamilton, who explained how she got her town to write a book, Life in Pacific Grove. Today I speak with one of the contributors to that book, Phyllis Edwards. Phyllis tells us that although she looked forward to writing her memoirs when she retired to Pacific Grove, she didn't make much progress. Well, not until she attended the free writing class at the library, which Patricia Hamilton ran. Phyllis gives us a great piece of advice on how to get started writing, and we wish her well as she works on the next chapter for the second book on Pacific Grove, because there's always a sequel when it's a popular story. Let's get started. Okay, welcome Phyllis Edwards to Historical.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Can you tell me how you came about to be a contributing writer to that community history?
Well, it started because I went to a class that Patricia was offering about writing one's autobiography. I had no intention of writing an autobiography, but I was very interested in writing memoirs. And so I went to that class, and in that class, she suggested this project about writing about life in Pacific Grove. And that's how I first heard about it.
Wow. So what attracted you to start writing about Pacific Grove? What kind of memories did you have in mind that you could write about?
I actually didn't have any. The problem was I had just moved to Pacific Grove. I've only been here about 4 years. So it was like I told Patricia, I can't write about this for this book because I haven't been here. She said, no, I want people to write about current day life in this town. And I said, well, I live here, so I guess and then I realized that I'm a big walker. I walk everywhere, all over this little tiny town. That's one of the reasons I chose this town when I decided to retire, because it's really a beautiful little town to walk in.
Uh-huh.
And so, as I was thinking about what I do with my life as part of Pacific Grove, I realized that walking was something that a lot of people in Pacific Grove do, and so I started writing about that.
Wow.
And I started writing about what I found as I started writing that was that this little town has a lot of little free libraries. I don't know if you know what those are, but I found there were 31 of those little free libraries in this very small town. So I wrote about them in that first book.
So tell everyone what a free library is.
A little free library is a little box that you put in front of your house on a post with doors or whatever you want. Have a little box, and in it you put a bunch of books that either you've read or you have or you want to share with somebody. And then people can come by as they come by your house, and they can borrow a book from your little library. And they can then bring another book back to replace it, or they can trade books all the time. And so that's kind of the process of little free libraries. They're all over the country now, but the ones here, I was surprised at how many there were in such a small town, even though I know it's a very kind of cozy little town, and so it didn't surprise me completely. But that's what I found so I just started looking for all of those guys, and I found them. So.
Wow, maybe you should tell us a little bit about Pacific Grove, how big it is and where it is.
I'm not sure of the population. All I know is it's probably under 30,000. It's just a very quiet little, they call themselves America's last hometown, because it is like a hometown used to be, with just a little town in the middle, and then people's houses all, in neighborhoods around.
Mm-hmm.
It's full of quite a few older people like me, because it's such a sweet place to retire. But it's also full of homes with children. And it's probably got the best school system in the state. It's got a wonderful school system here. So a lot of parents come here to bring their children here to go to school here.
And you're in the Monterey Peninsula, right, in California?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And Pacific Grove is a little sort of a knob on the shoreline that pushes out into the ocean, or at the bottom of Monterey Bay. And there's this knob that pushes out into the Pacific, and that's where Pacific Grove is.
Wow.
On three sides, it's surrounded with water from the ocean.
And surrounded by golf courses, I understand.
Oh, yes, it's got lots of golf courses. Well, you know, the weather here is so lovely that almost any time of year, it's a delight to be here. You know, it's why I like to live here where I can walk all the time.
Wow, that's great. So I suspect there's not too many streets that you haven't walked around.
Oh, pretty much all of them.
And since you've discovered 31 of these boxes,
Mhm.
what was the most surprising stories that came out of those boxes to you?
Well, I guess the most surprising one was a little box on Bentley Street or Avenue, and I was there just examining it and writing about it. And a woman came to the door, and we started talking. And it turned out that she's blind, but she has a little free library, and because she likes to share books with people. So that was kind of fun. So I got to talk to her and her son, who lives with her, and takes her places because she's blind. So anyway, I thought that was quite humorous to have somebody that doesn't read books who has a little free library full of books for the neighborhood.
Wow, it's really a community builder, isn't it?
It really is. And in fact, there is an organization that this woman was a part of, that there was a group of some sort, and they used to come around and sort of monitor the use of the books from particular people's boxes to see if they were being shared and all that. So they almost had an organization about it. And there's a website that people can register their little free library for around the world. I mean, they just register people from the whole country at this little website.
Wow.
So
And that depends on an honor system, doesn't it?
it does. One lady I talked to said that she loved her library and she was very happy with it, but she noticed that people didn't replace what they were taking, and she wasn't happy with that. So she put up a little sign that just said, "Please replace, take and replace." And after that, people started replacing the books. So she had this. She was like really determined she was going to get her little library used. So that was fun.
Yeah, that's great.
What I enjoyed about writing about them, though, was that what I did was I went to each box and I looked at its architecture, and then I looked at how the architecture blended or didn't blend with the home in which the people lived that had built the box.
Hmm.
So I kind of wove into my stories about the architecture of the town, because there's so many different kinds of architecture in this little town. So that was something fun. And so I talked about whether the color schemes coordinated or not, and who it looked like might have built it. Like there were some that were clearly built with children that helped to build the box, and they decorated it and all that. So you could kind of tell a little bit about the personality of the people in the home by what they had put on in their little free library box. So that was fun.
That's really interesting.
And I found new parts of town I'd never been in before, because I had found out about some of the little free libraries that I hadn't seen. And so I learned to walk in some new places in town. So that was nice.
Ah, so you set off on a mission.
Oh, yeah, I had a big mission. And this year I'm writing about just my walks. I walk everywhere in this town. And so I'm writing up a chapter for a new book. And this chapter is going to be about where I walk to all over town. So I'm going to write out how to take the walk, and what you might see on the walk, and so on. I did that with the Little Free Libraries. I wrote it up as little sections of town. I kind of tried to write them up with a little walkable piece for a day. So a visitor could come and say, "Oh, well, let's go to this, let's look at this part of town now." And so they'd take that section and walk that section and look at all the Little Free Libraries. I'm going to do the same kind of thing with my walks. So I'm going to just take certain parts of town where I like to walk and describe a way to go through the town and what you might see there, and what you might enjoy. So that's what I'm in the middle of right now.
Wow. So you mentioned that you started a writing class with Patricia Hamilton. Were you a writer before you started this?
Well, I've always been a writer of sorts. I was an editor for National Geographic's textbook Vision. And so I did a lot of writing with that. And I have found that writing the kind of technical writing we did in the textbooks to show teachers how to teach taught me a lot about how to write well, because you have very little space to write these directions in. And so I became a better writer through that work. But I'd always been writing little notes to myself about little things I want to write into my memoirs. I've got lists. I have a list of memoirs that rose out of my professional life, and then I have another group of them that are just about my personal life. So I've got these little notes in my computer about all the different things I'm going to write my memoirs about, but I was having trouble getting myself going with the actual writing. Patricia's the kind of classes that she conducted, and she used that curriculum to teach us how to get ourselves into the writing from memories of our childhood and our adulthood. For each class, it lays out a series of questions that, if you think on those questions, they will give you ideas of how you could approach a topic that you wanted to write about. It was very helpful to me, because I didn't have exactly writer's block, but I just couldn't get myself going with it. And the class that she taught really helped me with that a lot.
Wow. That's great. So you have started writing your memoir now too. Is that correct?
Yeah, I have several little episodes I've written up, yeah.
Oh, that's good.
I keep getting involved in other projects and I get taken aside from my memoirs. So.
It sounds like it happens. Wow.
Well, when you're a writer, that does happen.
So did you know that you were going to retire and be a writer in your retirement?
That was always one of my goals, was to have the time to actually write and enjoy writing, because I was always so busy when I was working.
Right.
So yeah, it was one of my goals as a retired person.
Oh, it sounds like you've made it happen.
Yeah, I have. I really enjoy the life of being able to. Well, I do a lot of volunteering for various projects around town, but I like being able to just be part of the town and yet have my own independent life that is just for me.
Mm. So when the book came out, The Life of Pacific Grove, were you surprised to your stories? What reaction did people have?
Well, not a lot, but one of the people, she did the most interesting thing. She had just read my chapter in the book, and she so loved my writing that she said, "Would you please send me some other bits of your writing? I love to read your writing." That was just one person, but that had never happened before. The people who have read the part I've written and been, or at least have seen some of the little free libraries, they always comment on the little free libraries, and they always say, "Well, there's one on such and such a street," and I would say, "Yep, been there."
Well, that's great. So you were happy with the way the chapters turned out?
Yeah, I really was, and I enjoyed that whole book though, because I was helping Patricia with various aspects of the project.
Uh-huh.
One of the things she asked me to do was, and I offered to do, and she was happy for me to do, was, because I had been an editor for so much of my life, she asked me if I would help edit some of the pieces that people wrote. And she gave me, because I was an educator and taught in ESL schools and was a principal of ESL schools, she gave me the writings from the adult school, the Pacific Grove Adult School, which is a school for immigrants who are learning English. And so I got to read what they wrote about living in Pacific Grove. And it was just lovely, because they just loved being here, and everything they said about it, except for one guy. One guy said, "I don't like PG." But everybody else said they liked it, and they talked about the interesting things about this town that they love so much. And of course, they love the freedom of being in this country.
Wow. So the book was a really good way to build community too.
It was. I've never been a really community involved person.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of has pushed me to a little bit more involvement than I would have been if I hadn't done this project.
Mm.
I'm kind of an introvert. I kind of like to be alone and not involved in a lot of things. Mm. But Patricia has a way of getting you involved. She has a way of getting people involved in things.
Well, it sounds like it was a great job.
Yeah, it really was. And I'm so enjoying my walks for this book, and just revisiting my walks and thinking about them from the viewpoint of someone else following my footsteps is really a pleasure, to imagine what it would be like for someone who's never been here before.
So, Phyllis, I'm going to ask you for whether you could give our audience some advice on what you would say to them to get them started writing, say, their memoir.
Well, as I said, the first thing I would do, I've always felt like I couldn't remember a lot of the details of my life. I'm a person who remembers things in gestalt. I remember the whole period or the episode of whatever happened at that time, but I don't remember the details. My brothers can tell stories, all these stories of our childhood that I don't remember. But once they start telling the stories, then I remember those stories too. So I start taking notes on everything my other members of the family, all the stories that they're telling about or talking about. I write down notes to remind myself of that story because I'll just forget it if I don't write it down. The first one I wrote it just came to me and I just could not stop writing. And it was about my grandmother's baking bread. It was just about the whole experience as a child of sitting and watching my grandmother baking bread. And it was just a very personal, delightful memory of the warmth of home and all that. And I wrote about that one just because I couldn't not write it. I just got so involved in it and I got so intrigued by everything and added so much detail that I thought, yeah, I can do this kind of writing. I can write this way because I didn't know if I could until I did that. But I would say the advice I would give people would be to start making a list of little incidents in their life. I was sort of blocked by the idea of having to write an autobiography because that seems so lengthy and you've got to have memories of every year of your life, which I don't have. The advice I would give would be to just keep writing down little notes about things that you do remember. Then try to imagine what it would be like if you had not had that experience. What would it be like to read about somebody else experiencing that? So that's kind of the way I approached it.
So let me get that last part straight. You would write about that incident, looking at it from the shoes of another person?
Well, as I looked at it in my mind thinking, what do I want to make sure this person understands of what this experience was like for me?
Right. Okay.
I was talking to the reader. Thinking about what the reader was reading made me realize all the detail I had to put in to actually make it a clear picture.
Oh, I see. So it's including a lot around maybe the weather.
Yeah, and just tiny little details like in the one about my grandmother, the clothes she wore and what her arms look like and little details that I remember very clearly, but unless I write it in the memoir, just writing about my grandmother making bread is not any very interesting thing. But when I would write about the details of that experience for me as a child, made it a rich piece of writing.
Did you use photos to remind yourself of that time?
I have thousands of photos, so I have a lot of photos of all those times. Yeah, so I use them just to refresh my memory of what life was like then.
Okay.
I grew up in a very poor family in many ways. It was a wealthy family in that they were devoted to education and speaking correct English and writing correct English and all that. And so I grew up with a family that was an important detail. Even though they didn't have money, they could sound educated. And they were educated because they studied and read all the time.
Mm. Wow. I can see where the influence was in your life. That's great. Well, I wish you the best of luck in finishing off your next chapter about walks around about Pacific Grove.
Uh-huh. That'll be fun.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you for being on Historical today, Phyllis.
Well, you're welcome. And I can't wait to hear hear your podcast.
Thank you for joining me in another episode of Historical. Feel free to let me know how you like Historical, either on iTunes or where you get your podcasts. Or you can email me, Peter, P-E-T-A, at Storycal, STORYICAL.com. Never miss an episode by joining us at our website, historical.com. May Historical inspire you to story the historical, because it's never too soon to get started, but often it can be too late.